Increasing chatter about the possibility of an Israeli attack against Iran's nuclear sites. A loud threat to topple Netanyahu's government ends with a whimper. And we speak to superstar historian Yuval Noah Harari. It's Unholy. I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland in London. Unholy, two Jews on the news. You may have noticed I lingered a little on the word London there because scene of the first ever Unholy live show just a few days ago. Very fond memories already of that. It was really quite a wonderful evening, wasn't it? We had a very, very good time there.
It really was. I was going to start talking about a huge event in London, people from all over the world with at least one diva on stage. I mean, of course, Beyonce in the Spurs Stadium in London. Also this week, the second biggest event, but we thank her very much for not having one of her performances on June 8th, so as not to put this dilemma in front of our fans where to go to, and indeed not in front of Jonathan Friedland himself where to go to. But as you say, it was really a heartwarming and unforgettable experience for us. First ever Unholy Live in London on Sunday. We hope the beginning of a beautiful tour.
It would be lovely, wouldn't it? No, it was huge. Queen Elizabeth Hall, which is a massive venue, and every seat was taken. And, you know, the feedback we got from a lot of people was just that they really wanted to sort of be together with other Unholy listeners, that, you know, people are kind enough to say we've been, that word that comes up, a kind of a lifeline for a lot of people since, in the 20 months since October 7th, that they needed to be in a place where that was talked about. And we had a pretty terrific show. Yuval Noah Harari was there, and Mira Awad, brilliant artist and performer, the band Oy Vavoy. So it was a really great evening. And as you say, we hope we will be with our listeners in one form or other, in one place or another. Again, when we all gathered, you're right, I did have to this time eschew the fringed jacket and cowboy boots that obviously I would have worn had I wanted to visit the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Of course, that is forbidden territory for me. So no Beyonce show for me. And as you say, we had something else to do on Sunday night. But no, since then, and we didn't get into it much then because it's gathered huge steam and momentum since, is the question of an Israeli military attack on the nuclear capability of Iran. It's been on the agenda one way or another, I was going to say for years, actually in a way decades. It's something Benjamin Netanyahu has talked about and wanting to do. I think it came into view in a very sharp way when Netanyahu was prime minister, Ehud Barak was his defense minister. Huge arguments. I think that's almost a decade ago. That was a big discussion. But it's right back now with a degree of urgency that I think not many remember. So, how's it looking from where you are? What are people saying?
Yeah, as you say, generally this has been a conversation for a long time for sure, and definitely since Iran's proxies have been weakened and its aerial defense weakened, and the fact that it is still rushing towards a nuclear option. But specifically, as we sit here, it's Thursday, 3 p.m. in Israel, 8 p.m. in Washington, the tension really is palpable. Now, this is what we know, right? U.S. officials saying Israel is ready to attack Iran, multiple sources saying to CBS News Israel is poised to launch an operation. United States actually evacuating non-essential personnel from its embassies in Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait. Conspiracy theorist Lara Loomer, one of the president's closest advisors, tweeting yesterday something big is coming. The mirror image of Lara Loomer here in Israel, if you will, a man named Yaakov Bardugo, who works in Channel 14 and is considered Netanyahu's mouthpiece, also saying a few days ago, we are days before an attack on Iran. Steve Witkoff also saying we must stand resolute against this danger no matter the cost. We'll add to that, importantly, that the IAEA has passed a resolution saying Iran is not complying with the non-proliferation obligations, which means that could lead to sanctions. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because it all begs the question, Jonathan, why is there so much chatter around Iran? Right? I mean, remember the famous good, bad, and the ugly quote, when you have to shoot, shoot, don't talk. Why is everyone talking so much? Even on the street level in this country, I'll give you a glimpse, right? The conversation is, wait a minute, Netanyahu's son Avner is getting married this Monday. So can something happen before Monday? Will something happen before Monday? Will it happen after Monday? I mean, this is the level of conversation. So again, why is there such chatter? And I will give you three theories just off the top of my head. One is the internal politics. You always have to think about that when you're talking about Israel. And remember, Netanyahu was trying to pressure the ultra-Orthodox not to dissolve his government. that worked. We'll get to that a little later. So that's one thing, right? What, you're going to dissolve the government now that we might be in a war with Iran? So that is one thing. The other thing is externally. Perhaps this is pressure being put on Iran to get a better deal from the president's side, right? So there's a kind of cooperation here saying, let's threaten them as much as we can so they will negotiate with good faith. The other option, and these are just the musings of my brain, like the Queen in Alice in Wonderland says she sometimes believes 6 impossible things before breakfast. So this is an idea or a thought. I would just say that if this is something that Israel seriously wants to do, would it be better to push Iran to strike first and then to have all the justification in the world to do whatever Israel wants in Iran? It's a very strange conversation, right, that we're nonchalantly talking about this, but this is the conversation that is happening in Israel this week.
Yeah, I mean, let me add in one more half theory based on your second point, the one about Trump. So I think this is absolutely a sort of, this is a triangle. It isn't just Iran standoff with Israel and vice versa. The United States is a crucial player in this, the key player in some ways. Not so long ago, the American president was saying, we are very close to a deal with Iran. Iran has not buckled, folded, signed on the dotted line yet. And therefore, the pressure, the leverage he has is that my guy in the Middle East, Israel, will pound you and hit you if you don't sign right here. In that sense, Israel is the kind of weapon that is pointed at the temple of the Iranian leadership. So there's that degree of pressure. The meme that is out there about Donald Trump in terms of his trade policy is taco. Trump always chickens out. In other words, he threatens to get better terms in a deal, but doesn't go through with it. You don't want to test that particularly, and that's why it's still, because if you're an American president, you have huge leverage in the form of a massive arsenal at your disposal, so people are not inclined to call your bluff. But there are plenty of skeptics who just think, okay, he's allowing Israel to rattle its saber so that Donald Trump, gets better terms and forces a kind of reluctant Iran to this deal that he wants to broker. No, the half theory I was going to add was whether there's a sort of trade-off here, which is we know that Donald Trump has been tired of this war in Gaza for a long time, that he doesn't like these images, particularly, he doesn't like violent images on the news. He doesn't like them when he's blamed for them. So, he saw what happened to Joe Biden, branded genocide Joe. He does not want that tag around his neck. And in order to put pressure on Netanyahu, he's got to give Netanyahu something. And so the idea that he says, all right, stop what you're doing in Gaza, but in return, you can have a free hand on Iran. That's plausible. But as I say, I don't think, that Trump wants this kind of kinetic action. One thing he said recently is, he wants peace and he wants deals. That's what he wants to be his legacy. That's how he wants to operate. Very ready to be proved wrong. I don't think it would be Donald Trump's first choice to see this go military. He'd prefer it to be diplomatic, with this as the lever, the pressure that gets you to diplomatic and to a deal.
Yeah, we spoke to Jake Sullivan 2 weeks ago on the podcast. He said Trump loves deals and he loves peace, and anyone who will give him that he will go with. I think that there's a lot of room for that theory that says, wink, wink, you end the war in Gaza and I'll give you a green light to do whatever you want in Iran. Remember Sullivan also saying he can't imagine Netanyahu would go forth with this kind of attack without the agreement of the president. Again, this is a huge deal, right? Again, we're talking about this a little nonchalantly. If this happens, the ramifications of this, Iran's possible response, what it means for the region, what it means for Israel. This is huge. But this is the conversation happening here. And like in a parallel universe, right, in which Israel might be going into this war with Iran, in which the war in Gaza is still continuing, day 615, a year and 8 months, and in which the military chief of staff is saying, we need more soldiers. The Israeli parliament is, as we speak, discussing the option of how to put into a bill the exemption of a chunk of the Israeli society, the ultra-Orthodox. So that is also happening really in a parallel universe to what all of that we have been discussing up to this point.
Yes, and we'll get on to that domestic question. Just the last thing on the timing, the sequencing, and the connection with the war in Gaza. I'm not sure how much it matters because I think judge a government by its actions. This Israeli government acts as if the only alliance that matters to it is Washington and everything else is irrelevant. But in terms of global support for military action against Iran, there would already be very, very mixed views and some hostility to that anyway. To do it right now, when you have even longtime allies of Israel, the likes of Canada, France, the UK, threatening to change the fundamental relationship they have with Israel over what is happening in Gaza and over the long-running question of humanitarian assistance, at that moment, it's going to be difficult for those leaders, for a Macron or a Carney or a Starmer, to come out and support this action, even though I think if the climate were different and the circumstances different, you could see a world in which they would actually either support it or indulge it and not condemn it. This timing makes it very, very difficult. And it will, there's a risk there for Israel that it's branded an act of aggression that the world condemns, with the exception of the US. Maybe Netanyahu is comfortable with that. As I say, the actions so far suggest they are. But I think if he did want diplomatic space, the way to do it would be to end the war in Gaza, give yourself a day or two of headlines about ceasefires and hostage returns and all of that, and then in that new window that would be created, take some action against Iran. That would go with the notion of a trade-off, a deal with Trump. But as we say, I'm just not sure about Trump, whether in the end he wants this level of kinetic action, as the military planners call it, on his watch. Not sure of that.
So like I said, meanwhile, in the Israeli parliament, the news continues. A very loud threat made by the ultra-Orthodox to vote for dissolving the Knesset ends with, surprise, surprise, a whimper. At least one of us said in an English accent that he's not holding his breath. So you can guess who that was last week when we said that the vote is imminent, and the opposition's attempt to reach some sort of majority on that failed. We should remind our listeners again that the problem itself is not going away. The fact that the ultra-Orthodox demand that there will be a law written instead of the one that expired that will essentially exempt large parts of the ultra-Orthodox from military service has not gone away. What they received were scribbles tonight made on yellow paper promising them certain things. Essentially, if this will ever become a law under these promises, then only in 5 years will we see the beginning of about 7,000 ultra-Orthodox men being enlisted every year. There has been an agreement of sanctions from the side of the ultra-Orthodox. This is considered a big deal that for the first time they agreed for sanctions for people who are not enlisting, but the content of the sanctions is something like you can't have an academic career, which is not a bad thing if you're a rabbi. They're not interested in the yeshiva students who are studying Torah to have an academic career. This doesn't solve the problem in any way. It does do what Netanyahu was hoping it would do, which is kick the can down the road, delay this for another. Remember, he needs to survive 6 weeks now for this session of the Knesset. Then there's a very long recess in which it is very complicated to dissolve the parliament, and only then does the parliament return at the end of October 2025. Elections originally slated for October 2026. That is really a long way still in the future. As I've been telling you for a while, I don't think anyone will wait that long. I do think that right now it seems like the only person who has the power to dissolve this coalition is Netanyahu himself, because the other threat that was made from the ultra-Orthodox is, as we said, not becoming, nothing became of it because they didn't vote to dissolve the Knesset the night between Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, and the reason why I wasn't holding my breath was twofold. First, I didn't think the fundamental calculation for the ultra-Orthodox parties had really changed the calculus. It's still in their interest more for this government to continue than for it to collapse. But the other reason is, look, this is what Netanyahu does. Netanyahu does better than anyone. People will have seen those old silent films where it would end on a cliffhanger with the damsel in distress tied to the railway tracks and the locomotive is apparently inches away, and somehow at the beginning of the next episode, she springs free. That is Netanyahu. This is his happy place. This is what he does. He's better at it than anyone. He gets himself in a some kind of parliamentary hole, arithmetic, and he finds a way out. He lives for another day. That's him. That's who he is. There's no, I don't think, big long-term strategy. It's just the next 24 hours. So, I think you're right. I think this thing will end when he's ready for it to end, because he thinks it serves his interests, that somehow the electoral stars align and he thinks he can do well in an election. That's when he'll pull the plug. And I don't, and as you said, I don't think there's anyone else who does it, because on this is why people talk about him as a magician. It's this particular kind of politics that he absolutely excels in. And so that's why I didn't think this would come too much.
From a political magician to an intellectual wizard, really. This is a conversation that we had with superstar intellectual historian Yuval Noah Harari at our event this week. And we wanted to actually hear it again, those of our listeners that were at the event, but also we thought it would be a good idea to bring it also to the people who couldn't be there, because we love this conversation.
We have a very special guest. He is one of the world's best-selling historians. He may be the best, or perhaps the second best known Israeli in the world. He is one of the foremost thinkers of our time. A warm welcome for Yuval Noah Harari. We are very, very thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation.
The thing that we do inevitably on Unholy is we talk about what's happened that week, and we're focused on the now. And what you do, and what has made you, acclaimed around the world, is this big picture, big sweep of history. So the events we were just talking about now, this period, October the 7th, 2023 till now, where does that fit? Is it footnote or chapter in the sweep of Jewish history?
I think it's could be one of the biggest turning points in Jewish history, maybe the biggest since the fall of the temple in 70 CE, since the Roman conquest, because Judaism has survived. It became the world champion in surviving catastrophes, but it never faced a catastrophe like we are dealing with right now, which is a spiritual catastrophe for Judaism itself. Because what is happening right now in Israel could basically, I think, destroy, void 2,000 years of Jewish thinking and culture and existence. That the worst case scenario that we are facing right now, and I emphasize it's a worst case scenario. We can still prevent it, and we can talk later about how to prevent it. But we should be clear about what we are facing if Israel continues on its present trajectory. What we are facing is the potential of an ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza and the West Bank, resulting in the expulsion of 2 million, maybe more, Palestinians from there, the establishment of Greater Israel, the disintegration of Israeli democracy, and the creation of a new Israel, which is based on an ideology of Jewish supremacy and on the worship of what were completely anti-Jewish values for the last 2 millennia. A country based on the worship of power and violence, and which is militarily strong. It will survive. It will be militarily strong. It will have alliances with various bullies around the world. It will also be economically viable. And this will be the spiritual disaster, because this will be the new Judaism that all Jews in the world will have to deal with. It will not disappear. Again, Jews are very good dealing with catastrophes, from the Roman conquest to the Holocaust. But this will not be a military catastrophe. The state will actually be successful in military and economic terms. And it will make the challenge much, much bigger. No Jew, say in London or New York or anywhere else, will be able to say, this is not the real Judaism. It's like being, say, a communist in the 1950s in London and saying, no, the Soviet Union is not really communism. They misunderstood it. No, this will be the new Judaism, and maybe the only Judaism.
No, there's so much to ask about what you're saying, but what I'm wondering is, and how to change that trajectory. But when you look at the political map, the extreme part of Israeli society is actually a minority.
History is done by minorities. Most people sit at home while history is being done by 5-10% of the population. This has always been the case. And I'm afraid that at least for some of the things that I've mentioned, it's not 5 or 10% of the Israeli population. Like, I was not surprised, but still shocked that when President Trump suddenly put on the table the idea, maybe we just expel all the Palestinians from Gaza, a lot of Israelis, including people I know personally, who had these thoughts somewhere in the back of the mind and always told themselves, you cannot say that, and it's pointless to say that because it's unrealistic. The moment it came out of the mouth of the US president, yes, we can do that. It was not 5 or 10% of the Israeli population. The support for these kinds of things, I don't know the exact numbers, but it could be even more than 50%.
But if you did the opposite and said Palestinian state and you'll have Saudi normalization, you don't think you'd have a strong support from the Israeli public?
It still can, but again, it's a question of what happens from now onwards. But the possibility, again, of ethnic cleansing and an undemocratic Israel based on an ideology of Jewish supremacy becoming the new reality, and this is not a prophecy, but this is a distinct possibility that we have to really take into account. And the big question that I would ask is, what are the values, what are the ideals that Israel still stands for? What positive ideals it still stands for? I'll tell a story from Jewish history. That 2,000 years ago, when the Romans destroyed the temple and destroyed Jerusalem, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asks the Roman commander, Vespasian, for a favor. And he asks him, give me the town of Yavne and its wise people. Ten li et Yavne v'chachamea. And Vespasian agrees. He gives Ben Zakkai Yavne, where he establishes a center of Jewish learning. And this is the previous big transformation in Jewish history. You know, biblical Judaism and Second Temple Judaism, it was a violent tribal religion. The central rituals of Judaism at that time were the bloody rituals in the temple. It was a very bloody religion. And at that moment, Ben Zakkai and his colleagues, they completely changed the meaning of Judaism. They turn it into a religion of studying. This becomes the number one Jewish value is to study, to learn, to debate, to develop wisdom. Jews sit in Yavne and they learn, and they go to Baghdad and Cairo and they learn, and they go to Golders Green and to Brooklyn and they learn. And for 2,000 years, this is what they do. We learn. And after 2,000 years, Jews from all over the world come back to Jerusalem to realize, to put into practice what they have learned for 2,000 years. And when I look at Israel now, I ask myself, what did they learn in 2,000 years? What the hell did they learn? They learned to build a strong army? Definitely. They learned to fight courageously? Definitely. Some of them learned the joy of crushing weaker people under our feet. They learned that. But all of these things, the Romans knew them 2,000 years ago. So Ben Zakkai made the wrong request. Instead of wasting 2,000 years on learning that, you could have just asked Vespasian, tell me, commander, how do you build a strong army? Tell me, you and your legionnaires, how do you develop the courage to fight in war? And tell me about the pleasure of crushing weaker people under our feet. What was the point of 2,000 years of learning if the only thing we learned is what the Romans already knew. It's a waste of time.
That future scenario you set out, which is a very bleak picture of a different kind of Judaism.
Some of it is being realized as we speak.
Sure. But what my first question to you is where this sits in the sweep of Jewish history, and you've just given us a very arresting sense of that with these 2,000 wasted years. How much, though, of what's going on now in Israel, this particular government, the formation it's taking, fits actually with some global trends that we can see around us? In other words, that it's not peculiarly Jewish, but is actually in keeping with what we might see in Trump or Orban or other places.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that should be emphasized, that there is nothing uniquely bad about Israel. There is nothing uniquely bad about what's happening now in Gaza. We've seen it so many times in history, and we see it also today in different areas around the world. And certainly what Israel is now undergoing, both internally in terms of the disintegration of the democratic system and also externally with the war, it is part of much wider trends. And certainly if we talk about the war, it's part of the collapse of the global liberal order, which dominated most of the world in recent decades and is now being rapidly dismantled, first and foremost by the country that created it in the first place, the United States. Again, it's a big subject, so I'll focus on just one thing. The most important taboo of the global liberal order was that that strong countries cannot just invade and conquer other countries by force of arms just because they are stronger. This was the situation for thousands of years. This is something that the Romans did very, very well. And it stopped being the situation in the last few decades. It has been, I would say, the most amazing political and maybe moral achievement of humankind. And it was not a dream, it was a reality. And the place to see that it was a reality is in government budgets. You know, people talk about peace and war, and they think about, all these pacifist literature or poetry. Don't read poetry, read government budgets. And government budgets over the last 20 or 30 years have been the most amazing thing to read. Because for most of history, like in the Roman Empire, more than 80% of the budget of the Roman Empire was spent on soldiers, warships, fortresses, weapons. And this was the situation until the 20th century. You look at the budget, not just of empires, also of democratic countries. In the early 20th century, more than 50% is spent on the military. In the early 21st century, the average expenditure all over the world, taking all countries, including Israel and Iran and North Korea into account, the average expenditure went down to between 6 and 7%, compared to 10% average spent on healthcare. It was the first time in human history that governments spent more money on healthcare than on the military. So it was a reality. And it was all based on this basic taboo that, okay, there are civil wars, there are revolts, revolutions, we didn't solve all problems. But one thing is off the table. You cannot invade and conquer another country just because you're stronger. And this taboo has now been broken. Most clearly by Putin with the invasion of Ukraine, but instead of trying to contain it and to punish Russia for what it has done, the current US administration joined Russia in basically saying this is the new normal. It's no longer a taboo, you can now do it. And for instance, when President Trump says that he has plans to annex Greenland, and if Denmark refuses to cede Greenland, then all the options are on the table, including the use of force. You know that we are in a different world. And every government around the world now realizes. Now, we had this terrible meeting between Trump and the greatest Jewish leader of our time, which is Volodymyr Zelensky, was just, again, you saw history in action on television. Trump was repeatedly telling Zelensky, you don't have the cards, you don't have the cards. And Zelensky was saying, I'm not playing cards. And Trump was telling him, you are playing cards, and you don't have the cards. International relations are no longer about law, about morality, about justice. It's only about cards. And every prime minister and president in the world was watching this exchange, telling herself or himself, I could be in Zelensky's chair next year. Do I have cards? And every prime minister and president picked up the phone and told his defense minister and his treasury minister, we need cards. I'm traveling the world, and in more and more countries I visit, the one thing that I keep hearing is nuclear weapons. You go to Germany, you go to Poland, you go to Japan, they are telling you, we need nuclear weapons. If Russia invades Lithuania or Poland, will the Americans really protect us? No. We need cards. So if you're Germany, for instance, and you ask yourself, who will give us some cards? So we can't trust the US. There are two other countries in Europe with nukes. You have Britain, you have France. Britain is no longer in the EU. France, what if Le Pen or one of her people wins the next elections? Does Germany really want its defense to rely on that kind of French government? What happens in Britain? What happens if Nigel Farage is the next prime minister? Does Germany really want to depend on the decisions of Nigel Farage to defend it from Russia? So they say, we need cards.
We've got on, and we pushed you there into the bigger picture of the world. Just before we leave our parochial particular concern about the conflict in Israel-Palestine, but it's a thing that people say about other conflicts. The thing about conflicts is, in the end, they end. Whether it's Northern Ireland or South Africa, whatever it is, in the end, they end. Is that true? And if it's not true, what makes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict exceptional?
It's not exceptional. I mean, it's exceptional in the sense that every conflict is exceptional. There are unique features for every conflict in the world. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not exceptionally brutal. It's not exceptionally complicated. It's not exceptionally long. If people say, every conflict ends in the end, so I don't know, you mentioned Ireland. How many centuries did it take? I don't know when you start. It's always a question when you choose to start it.
Yes.
But if you start, in the 12th century with William Strongbow and the Norman barons coming to Ireland, so it took, 800 years? Israel is just, it's just 1 century. So by this calculation, it will still be going in 2,600, when there are no longer any human beings around, and it's just AIs and cyborgs.
We're going to get onto that.
I don't know if that's a scary thought or not, actually.
I was just thinking how full of cheer Yuval is. He's our little ray of sunshine that he's bringing here.
It does help. It does help because I have to tell you, yesterday I was at a dinner party with very good friends, and there were 2 topics on the table. One was the Middle East, and the other was AI. And the issue of AI was markedly more depressing than the Middle East, which I found, in a weird way, a little bit reassuring. Because at the end of the day, the Middle East is about what you would call the carbon-based mind, right? The decisions. It could be bad decisions, good decisions, trajectories, but it's still humans. And AI, at some point, when it can refine itself, when we hit the artificial global intelligence or the artificial superintelligence, no one honestly knows what is going to happen, not the designers, not anyone else. And I wonder what would you even like this audience to leave here with, thinking about that, about AI?
Before we kind of rush to say, is it good, is it bad, utopian scenarios, dystopian scenarios, just to understand what to focus on. Why is it such a big revolution which is different from anything we've seen before in history? And the term to focus on is agency. Every previous invention in human history empowered humans, because whether it was the printing press or the atom bomb or the airplane, it was a tool in our hand. We decide what to do with it. AI is different because it's not a tool, it is an agent. What is an agent? An agent is something that can make decisions by itself, can invent new ideas by itself, can learn and change by itself. By definition, if you create an agent, you cannot predict what it will do and how it will behave. If you create something which you know in advance everything it will do, it is not an AI. It could be automatic. We have lots of automatic machines, coffee machines, whatever. They are not AI. AI is defined by the ability to learn and change and make decisions by itself. And we have no idea what will happen when not just one AI appears. We are talking about billions of AI agents that will be here in just a few years. They may not be AGI, artificial general intelligence. They might have still relatively limited scope, but they will increasingly be in charge of the financial system, of accepting people for jobs, of the military. Going back to the Middle East, the Gaza war has been one of the first AI wars in history. A lot of the decisions during the war, including life and death decisions, which buildings to bomb, which people to kill, were done to some extent by AIs. It can also, of course, have enormous positive potential. Millions, billions of AI agents can change the NHS and solve the problem of shortage of at least some doctors and other medical personnel, can provide, you can have the best doctor in the world available 24 hours a day everywhere for £0. You can have the best healthcare in history. At the same time, again, the dangers are really literally beyond our imagination.
Let's bring in a question from our audience, actually, because it was on this. We asked all of you before you came to send in questions to us, and we're going to get to most of them later, but one of them was directly on this, and it was addressed to you. Daphne Salomon, I would ask where you are, Daphne, but I can't see any of you anyway. But she asks, as a parent to young children, will the idea of having values survive the next iteration of humanity living alongside AI? The idea that in all realms of life, social, political, cultural, there are values like truth, kindness, innovation, creativity. Will those simply be replaced, she asked, by fabricated truth and reality? There'll be no reason to acquire knowledge or expertise. It will all be irrelevant if AI is sort of in the forefront. So what happens, Daphne asks, to values in the world you're describing?
They are more important than ever because the decisions, the choices we need to make are more consequential than ever. And we cannot rely on the AIs to make these decisions for us, because a lot of people confuse, they hear AI, artificial intelligence, they think that intelligence is somehow connected to truth. So a super intelligent AI will have a kind of super access to truth. No, intelligence is not about truth. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to define goals and solve problems on the way to the goal. The truth is one of the things that can help you do that, but not the only one. And we have seen with human beings that human beings until today have been the most intelligent animals, entities on the planet. And at the same time, we have also been the most delusional entities on the planet. We believe nonsensical things that no chimpanzee and no dog and no horse would ever believe. And a super intelligence is very likely to be super delusional, even more deluded than we are. So we would need, again, a very strong ethical basis, a very strong basis of values, more than even before, because the challenges are bigger.
How do you prepare your children, the next generation? How do you yourself prepare for that kind of world?
The most important thing is to have a very flexible mind, because the one thing we know for sure is that the pace of change is only going to accelerate. Nobody has any idea how the financial system or the economic system would look, the job market would look like in 10 years or 15 years. So if you say, okay, I'll teach my kids how to code computers, this is the computer age, they should learn how to code. No, in 5 or 10 years, maybe you don't need any human coders because AI is doing all the coding. So we don't know, the reality is we just don't know what will be the skills people will need in 10 years, except for one. We know they will need the skill to readjust and reinvent themselves. And again, this is a very difficult mental skill. It's not learning something that then remains unchanged throughout your life. It's learning how to keep learning all your life. And maybe this brings us back to the beginning of our talk about Ben Zakkai going to Yavne to learn. And this was supposed to be, the Jewish strength. We know how to learn. And should have been very useful in the 21st century if we don't forget it.
I want to go back to even an earlier part of our talk, which is my introduction of you. And I mentioned how you are one of the best known Israelis in the world. And just in our closing minute or two, what has that been like in this period, these 20 months we're talking about, to be famously an Israeli? In the worlds you move in, going through the world, has it been different? Has it been harder? Just tell us about it.
Personally, I did not encounter a lot of anti-Semitism. I'm doing events all over the world. So in a few places there were demonstrations, like we were in Seoul, and we had a demonstration of people chanting my name, somehow linking it with genocide. What was it? Harari, you can hide, you're supporting genocide. And it was 8 students. They were not violent. And it's a free country, South Korea, just had an election. And they are free to demonstrate. And I don't agree with them, but I think they should have the right to say these things. I don't think it's very constructive, but humans often do unconstructive things. I did have a lot of more constructive conversations all over the world. One of the things that I see, for instance, in Israel, is that people have this kind of, it's, I think, part of the government propaganda, this extreme idea that in the whole world everybody hates us. Like I'm talking with people in Israel and they tell me, be careful in London, it's very dangerous there. And again, the ability of humans to invent and believe in illusions that serve their purposes. I do hope that what you're trying to do and have a more constructive and complex conversation, the ability to see, the humans have also this amazing ability to hold 2 ideas in their mind at the same time. You have these billions, tens of billions of neurons and trillions of synapses. They should be able to hold 2 ideas. I didn't say 10 ideas. 2 ideas at the same time. That Israel has a right to exist and also Palestine has a right to exist. Shouldn't be so difficult.
Thank you. We are...
As long as there are humans, it's always a delight to talk to Yuval Noah Harari. It really is. And even after, I think it would be a delight.
Even after, it's a big, big and warm thank you to Yuval Noah Harari.
Thank you.
There's so many great parts in that conversation. I think I'll take with me that notion that if you want to understand a nation, read its budget books and not its poetry, which says a lot on the priorities, about the priorities of every single nation, either present or past.
I thought so too. I think the other big takeaway for me was this point which that minorities write history. They make history. It's small numbers often who are really committed. And, there was a lot of very sobering talk in a conversation with Yuval Noah Harari. But I think that if there is a takeaway that can give people some hope is, look, a small minority have moved Israel and the Jewish people in the direction that he charted, that he is alarmed by. In some ways, the flip side of that means it would only take a small, admittedly equally committed minority to push things back on track, as I would see it. So I think, there was some sobering messages there, but I think there's some hope contained in the idea that it's not going to have to be everyone. You don't have to win everyone over. Even a small group of people who are very committed can get things back, as I said, on track or even charting a new and more hopeful course. But extremely stimulating, as he always is. There's a reason why he is an intellectual superstar. So we were thrilled that he joined us on our stage at our London live show.
We'll be back in a minute with our Mention Chutzpah Awards.
Hey, podcast listeners, this is Amanda Borschel-Dan, host of the Times of Israel's daily briefing, What Matters Now, and our newest series, The Friday Focus with Lazer Berman. If you want to put faces to the names in the news and see footage of what's happening on the ground, check out our Times of Israel YouTube channel, and you can watch all 3 podcast series there too. So now you can listen or watch wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, shalom.
We promised there, and in fact we carried on there, our tradition of awards, and we carry that on right now. I think the Chutzpah nomination falls to you, Yonit.
Yes. Look, I think there are people in the world who suffer from attentionese, right? They want the world to talk about them. They go to a lot of provocations to make sure that they grab headlines. I'm looking at you, Greta, but this is not my chutzpah award of the week. I think that generally the way to deal with these people is to ignore them. That will help them recover and, go back to society as healthy people. But sometimes I can't help myself. And so this week, I would suggest the award goes to Galit Distal Atbarian, who's an MK from the Likud. I think not the first time nominated in our podcast. By the way, also an award-winning author, which just proves that people are complicated. Anyway, this week, she argued with Labor MK Gilad Kariv. He's also a reform rabbi. She chairs a subcommittee in the Knesset about Jewish thought and education. And he said women could wrap tefillin. She kicked him out of the committee and commented, the Jews here want to continue. Which, of course, is insinuating that he, or a reformed Jew, is not a real Jew. Something that has been said on occasion, particularly from the ultra-Orthodox parts of Israeli politics, and now feels like it's percolating into other areas. Now, to me, I have to share with you the first thought I had, Jonathan, when I heard that. And that is about the huge amount of Jews from diaspora coming to Israel after October 7th. And the philanthropic work here that is not just writing a check. It is meeting with people. It is seeing what is needed to help Israel get back on its feet. It's caring, it's supporting, it's doing everything to help. Some of these people, newsflash, are Reform Jews. And the way that you are disrespecting them is just insulting in a very, very deep way. I think that the way that we talk about other people that we disagree with after October 7th needs to be markedly different than the way we talked before October 7th. And the first person who seems to understand that is Galit Distal herself, who said in January 2024, she was guilty of the sin of tearing the country apart. She resigned from her ministerial role. She said there were about 100 people who drove 9 million people toward the abyss. And that she was one of them. She weakened the nation with her rhetoric. So that was her contrition. It was brief. Now she's back to this rhetoric. I would just, hold on to the American adage that says, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
there would be a deafening silence on the benches of many Knesset members if they followed that very wise rule. No, I think a very worthy chutzpah nominee, and you're absolutely right about diaspora Jews. The American Jewish community, I think, is overwhelmingly, or very large numbers anyway, are non-Orthodox, and that's true of other communities around the world. And, it's a massive middle finger that she was essentially showing them, and I think you're spot on. So I think that passes through the nominations committee unanimously. I've got a choice in our Mensch category. I want to nominate someone who many of our listeners will not have heard of. In fact, I think almost all of them. His name is Ethan Amittai Westfield. He is 13 years old. And last weekend, I was present for his bar mitzvah. And, you'll be thinking, okay, well, we've all got friends who have bar mitzvahs, fine. There are many unique things about Ethan. He did his portion very beautifully. That was all great. But the particular reason I'm mentioning him is that he is the grandson of Yocheved and Oded Lifshitz. Yocheved famously held hostage in Gaza and released early on after October 2023. And Oded Lifshitz was confirmed as dead just a few months ago. It just happens to be that Sharon Lifshitz, their daughter, is a member of the same synagogue that I go to. And she lives here in London, and this was the bar mitzvah of her son. And it was an extremely moving occasion. Just every aspect of it. I mean, for one thing, the rabbi praised Ethan for having learnt the portion so well, because he'd had to learn it 3 different times, 3 different portions, because the date kept on getting postponed to do with the wait for news about his grandfather, Oded. Hearing Sharon called up for an Aliyat Torah to go up to read the Torah, the Hebrew name is called out in canted Sharon Bat Yocheved for Oded. Very moving to me, and everyone there. And then finally, as many synagogues around the Jewish world, there have been an empty chair for the remaining hostages with portraits sitting there. They were there throughout, 2 hostages who are still in Gaza. And again, following what has become a tradition, there is a prayer for hostages, and that was sung. And to hear that being sung by a congregation and looking and seeing Yocheved Lifshitz in among that congregation, well, it got me, put it that way. And really, above all, this was a joyous occasion for a family that have really known so much sorrow over the last 20 months or nearly more. And the reason why they were able to come together in joy was because of Ethan Lifshitz, 13 years old. So that is why he is my nominee for Mensch of the Week.
If ever there was a reason for the Yiddish word verklempt, I think that was the story. It's a beautiful one. I'm glad that you told us the story. We are, ending this episode of Unholy in a week that was very special for us. So we want to use that opportunity to say thank yous. We said our thank yous at the event for everyone who helped facilitate that, but a good opportunity to say a big thank you to our inimitable producer, Michal Porat. We would be lost without you. To our co-founder, Lior Friedman, and co-founder and coach. Also, if I may, Sarah, thank yous to friends who walk with us a long way and couldn't be there in London. So Gaia Glazer, Omer Primat, Itai Dankner, and Justin Hyatt, thank you for all of what you did for Unholy.
Absolutely. Our thanks to all those people, to many other partners who helped the occasion as well. I mentioned them on the stage of the night, the team at Curtis Brown, at Sendler, at the South Bank. Also Jewish News helped us get the word out about that big live show. But finally, I think we can have a chance to hear something really was very special, and a second chance for us to thank them. Oi for Voy, who performed, who we've mentioned actually on the podcast before, this extraordinary musical collective. They've been around 20 plus years, drawing on klezmer music, Ladino music, Mizrahi music, Israeli music. They have had a sort of, a bruising time recently where a couple of performances of theirs were cancelled. They talked to us about that on stage, but they have composed a really genuinely beautiful song, which somehow amazingly manages to be simultaneously, has a sort of melancholy and sadness in it, but it is also rousing and uplifting. It's inspired by the tragedy at the Nova Music Festival and the resolve that many people have expressed that we should dance again. And a big thank you to Oi for Voy, and this is Dance Again.
Although will dance again. Never say this is the final road for you. Though leaden skies may cover over days of blue, we will dance again. We will dance again. We will dance again into the dawn. Into the